right. Hello, everybody. Today, my guest is Ryan O'Hara, who is the VP of Growth and Marketing at LeadiQ. Over the past several years, Ryan has trained thousands of sales reps in personalized prospecting and social selling. Prior to LeadiQ, Ryan has been an early employee at several startups, helping them with marketing and prospecting tactics, including Din, hopefully I pronounced that correct, who was acquired by Oracle for $600 million in 2016. At Din, Ryan was the first BDR, that's business development rep, and he trained all the sales hires on prospecting, helping the team to scale from 3 to 100 reps. He's had prospecting campaigns featured in Fortune magazine, Mashable, Inside.com, Sales Hacker, and the Next Web. He's also the host of the Prospecting Podcast. So Ryan, after that intro, welcome to the show. It's great to have you with me today.
Thanks. I do want to mention too that like I did eventually roll into marketing, but I do marketing stuff mainly. But like a lot of my bio stuff is heavy on prospecting because like honestly, that's where teams need a lot of help. I think you know what I mean. I think outbound marketing is kind of heading in a bad direction, and we can fix it.
What direction do you think it's heading in, and why is it, in your opinion, why is it heading in a bad direction?
Yeah. So the way I look at it, there's kind of, I know people sometimes call these things vanity metrics, but if you look at a prospecting team, the average response rate on a cold email is less than 1%. And the average response rate on a cold call is less than 3%. Simply put, prospects are learning to tune us out. And this is a problem because if we are supposed to get 60% of our revenue from outbound prospecting, what are we going to do in 10 years when you don't have those channels anymore? I mean, literally, you get a call on your phone and it's not no number. What do? People hit the side button on their phone and send it right to voicemail. My inbox, I literally don't even check it anymore. I have an EA that checks my inbox for me. That's why I didn't see the email that you guys wrote me earlier. Like, it's like, this is what's happening to buyers everywhere because they have to tune out messaging. And I think that there's a couple of symptoms that have caused this. But the overarching problem is that reps are just not putting the time into the right things anymore. So they spend their time prospecting and using stuff like, I'll give you an example. There's a company I talked to last week. They're using 9 different applications to create an opportunity between what they're using for email, getting data, creating leads in Salesforce, pushing stuff in, LinkedIn Sales Navigator. You start adding all these different tools up, Gong for call intelligence. You add all these things up and administrating and using all this stuff. How are they going to have time to write a good cold email or do a good cold call?
Yeah, the stack around this is getting really complex. And I think I don't really see an end in sight because now we have the revenue intelligence, or I think that's the official category of Gong and Chorus. You've got the sales the outreach IOs of the world, the sales lofts. I think that's sales engagement. Of course, you've got CRMs, and then you've got lead intelligence tools. And I'm probably just scratching the surface there. So I guess more and more people are trying to just navigate this complex tech stack and not really focusing on the message. Do you still believe that outbound marketing can be effective if it's done the right way?
Yeah, absolutely. I was nodding profusely on a podcast. That's always a classic podcast veteran move.
But I do the same thing, usually to keep the guest talking.
But it's totally no. But I'm like agreeing with you completely. There is still hope. There's an asteroid coming to Earth, but we can send Bruce Willis up to blow it up, and it's very doable. There's a couple things that you can do right now that your team should do to change their strategy. The first thing is this. Just because we've built tools that let you automate cold emails and cold calls doesn't mean you should use them that way. A good way of looking at it would be like, I have a car and I can drive on the road. That car can go off road. That car can go over the speed limit, but it doesn't mean you should go over the speed limit. And that's sort of a good way of looking at it. I mean, if I use a sales engagement platform, let's say I use an outreach or a sales off, both those tools allow you to check off a box when you build a sequence that says auto send email, or auto send call, or auto dial call. And you send that thing off to a prospect, you just missed a chance to really make a good impression for it. The way I sort of look at it is I think the future of prospecting, even though these things are automated and they can make you more efficient, the future of prospecting isn't going to be that. The future of prospecting is going to be, I want to make a Super Bowl ad, but for one account. because when I bring that account in, I'm going to make a couple $100,000 off of it. So I don't care if I spent a week putting together something for one account. And that's sort of the direction that we're going to start heading toward. You're going to see organizations shift to that because AI and stuff is going to make it so you can automate all the messaging and all the calls and all the scripts and all the stuff you send over email. And eventually prospects will learn to tune that out too. They won't be able to tune out the human element of like, how do I connect with this person individually?
Yeah. I got a prospecting email today that I thought was interesting because it was it was a pitch for a podcast guest. And it said it was a Loom video, and I think that was a part of why it was effective. But it was the guy who sent the email was not the guy who shot the video. There were actually three people. There was the guy who sent the email, and he sent the email to alert me that, hey, my colleague shot this Loom video recommending that this other person be a guest on your show. And it seemed a little bit overly complex, but it drew me in, and the Loom video I thought was quite well done. And I believe that there was definitely time spent on thinking about listening to the podcast and thinking about what our needs are in our audience. And so I had to tip my hat to that. But I don't know, I get dozens of those a day. Most of the time I can archive without even opening when I just see that they haven't even personalized with my name. But most people still do such a lazy job with it, and it's all automated.
Yeah. And that's that's sort of the issue here too, is like, you're looking at the preview text. If that preview text was about you, you'd probably open the email, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Usually I'm still opening emails even if it's personal. If it just says hi Paris, and if the first sentence starts to look decent, I'm opening most of those. But still, the large majority, it just says hello or hi there. And come on, I mean, they can do better than that, I think.
Hey, there's the greatest personalization they can come up with. I sort of think the way I've been thinking about it a lot, there's kind of 3 layers of personalization. Keep in mind, sales and prospecting has been around for, I don't know, hundreds of years now. You think about how sales started, right? This is the domino effect that has caused us to get to this point today. When sales first started, it was people selling face to face. You would go to one of the most popular ways that sales teams scaled back in the old days is they actually would set up stations and kiosks at train stations. So like people would go to a train station. The rich people would be traveling across the country to go out west or check out something. They'd stop at these train stations, they'd hear pitches, and then they'd move on to the next city. And the way that they scaled that is they basically had everyone learn the same script and do the same thing because you only have a couple minutes to get everyone through. You don't have time to personalize stuff. And then the next evolution of that was in the 30s and 40s, the first full-time cold calling position was opened. The Chicago Tribune was actually the first company to do it. So they had a person that would read a script, and they basically were going door to door to businesses and trying to sell them advertising space in the newspaper. And what they shifted to was, wow, we can call these people a lot faster. So they would just took the same scripts. Problem is when you go to those businesses, you don't know when you're on the phone, you don't know who you're calling. In fact, they would just cold call like, what are we a number, hoping it was a business because that's who had phones first. And when email came out, we took the same scripts that we're doing on phone and put it on email. And social's now been around for 10 years. People are now taking what they used to do in a cold call and doing it on LinkedIn for messaging. You start stacking this stuff up, and video's now doing the same thing too. We have a monkey see, monkey do effect where we look at the old way that things were done. And because of that, we're not thinking about all the information you have about someone today. There's way more information out there. Every buyer and decision maker, if you work at a Fortune 500 company, you're probably getting pushed by your boss to put stuff out online if you're in a position of hiring, because that's how you build a brand for the company. Their CEOs are doing it. Like you see, like T-Mobile CEO is super active on social, trying to post stuff up there to represent the company because people like people, they don't like brands. And they're stemming that everywhere. You kind of have to do the same thing as a buyer. And so buying's changing now. And the way that you get in touch and connect with these people is you need to personalize stuff toward that person individually. And that's kind of the thing that's really shifted. You go back 20 years, the days of someone working at a company for 15 years is gone, or 20 years. Now everyone's changing jobs. Average person changes jobs every 18 months. So if I'm changing jobs every year and a half, that means that like, if I prospect you about your company, you might have one foot out the door and be like, I hate my company, screw this. Yeah. And so like you're missing the mark there.
You just gave me a great segue into one of those questions that we sent over. Your career, you've been almost 6 years at LeadiQ, is that right?
Yeah. It's been a
So
long time.
you've really stuck there. And what has it that, and you've done a lot of really interesting things before that, but what have been some of the factors that have kept you at Lead IQ for so long?
Yeah, well, I think I really have a passion for sales. I graduated in college during the financial crisis. I wanted to work in
Hmm.
marketing, and all the entry level jobs were taken. So I got a BDR job, and I worked as a business development rep, reached out to people for a couple of years, and I was just
Hmm.
doing it to get into marketing. I was like, I just got to get something so I don't have that gap in my resume. And I hated that I learned all this cool stuff about it and approached it like a marketer and then abandoned
Hmm.
it. And I managed to be able to come back to that working at LeadiQ. And now I'm learning there's a lot of people that struggle. And that's kind of like where I feel good. Like I'll get people that message me all the time that say like, hey, this tip you gave me or this thing you did really helped me. And that makes me feel good knowing that like I'm having an impact as opposed to like, just collecting a check and mailing it in sort of, which is what I think a lot of people end up getting stuck doing at companies.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's kind of made me stick around. And I have my fingerprints all over the brand. And that's part of what I think is like the new way to do marketing. People don't like brands, they like people. So
Hmm.
I've unintentionally become the face of the company, and that's kind of how we've gone to market.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen tons of the videos, even going back to 2016. And it seemed like you got into video even a little earlier than the mainstream. Just seeing some of the older stuff that you put out. How important is video now, even in the basic playbook of an SDR or a BDR?
Yeah, or even in a marketer too, if you're trying to build your
Mhm.
brand out there. I think you need it because there's this old theory that was done. There was this in the 80s, basically around early 90s when Johnny Carson was retiring. The University of New Hampshire did a study where they surveyed people and they asked them, "Hey, how are you dealing with Johnny Carson retiring?" And he had done the show for 30 years, 4,000 episodes. Hell, Conan just retired last week, and I've been bummed about that a little bit. But like, they
Oh, I
asked
didn't know
people,
that.
yeah, people. Well, he's going to move to HBO and do a weekly format or something. But they started asking people like, "Hey, how are you dealing with this?" They took a blind group and asked people how sad they were about Carson retiring, and then they asked people how sad they were about their parents dying, and the sentiment was just as dark. And the reason is because when you see the same person on the air every day for 30 years, you build a connection with them. That's the same thing that happens with your prospects and your buyers is like you have to constantly be out there putting stuff out there because that's how they build a relationship with you. I'm sure I probably have roped a lot of our customers in by them knowing me and liking me from the content that I put out there. If I stop putting content out there, LeadiQ as an entity is just like the hundreds of other apps that do what we do. But the thing that makes us really different is the people that work there and having a connection to those people. Well, the reason we get what I call the old Irish try when someone's trying to try us versus a competitor is
Hmm.
because they know the people that work here because we put ourselves out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I recognize right away that there's no other competitor in your space who has such uh, a face of the brand the way that you are, and the humor element also I think is really unique. Is that a reflection of just your personality, or did you decide at some point that this was just really an effective strategy to be funny?
It's a combo, a little bit of it.
Yeah.
So here's the evil part. The evil part, if you're a customer, don't be mad. It's engineered a little bit. So here's the deal. We do an exercise. I first learned about this in the early 2010s, but we do an exercise called brand archetyping. Do you know about this, Paris? Like, have you ever done brand archetyping before?
I've heard of it, but maybe you can describe it a little more.
So in the 60s, I like telling these stories. Sorry, I'm like going flashback, like the old times. Like that's what I'm doing right now. But in the 60s, ad agencies used to bring in psychologists to like do stuff. It was a huge trend that like they'd hire them and have them on staff to talk about the psychology of advertising and marketing and stuff. And one of the things that they used to do is they found out that people like putting people in categories. So like if you
Hmm.
are in school when you meet someone, you usually are like, oh, is that like I'm not. I know it's kind of cliche and immature now, but like, is that person a jock? Is that person a nerd? Is that person a class clown? Is that person one of the best at everything they do? Is that person a brainiac? Are they smart? These are categories that we put growing up that are building blocks to how we look at society and how we socialize with people. Brands can do the same thing. And you'll see brands do it all the time. They basically, there's 12 different brand archetypes, And the thing is, we like all these type of people. We all like jocks. We all like nerds. We all like smart people at different points, class clowns. The idea is that if you can
Hmm.
commit to one, you can bring life to a brand that feels like it's a person. And that's what we do at LeadiQ. We're a gesture brand. So like our goal is to try and when I put content out there or Mazda on our team puts content out there or Jeremy, we're trying to give you information, but we're trying to deliver in a way that's as entertaining as possible. And that's engineered intentionally because it gives us a compass for what kind of content we want to make. And I'll give you a perfectly good example. One of our biggest competitors that come up on deals is Zoom Info and DiscoverWork. They're two
Hmm.
pretty big companies. They're now one company today. 2 years
Yeah.
ago, when they first merged, a bunch of our competitors wrote these like reflective blog pieces about like, what's this mean for the space? Oh, it's really positive for the space and all that stuff. And I just saw that. I like roll my eyes. I'm like, I know these guys are like, oh crap, that sucks. Or like, oh crap, this is a competitor and stuff. By the way, a lot of our customers use both of us, so like it's totally
Hmm.
cool to use both. But um,
Yeah.
I looked at it and said, what can we do that's different that fits that gesture brand? So we did an announcement where we talked about how at the time we were the third place market provider. When they both merged, we became number two. So I made a video talking about all these people that came in second place, like Buzz Aldrin, the Los Angeles Rams, because the Patriots had just beat them in the Super Bowl. I made a list of all
Hmm.
these second place companies. And then I had everyone in the, like a bunch of people in my office run into the camera. We just started doing a dance party to celebrate that we're now in second place because they merged. And the video is one
Cool.
of our most viewed videos. It had like 25,000 hits on LinkedIn, lots of comments. There are people that didn't know we even competed with them that messaged us and asked us like, hey, how are you guys different? I didn't know that. And there were also people that wanted to talk to us because of the merger. They were thinking about like, well, now I need to add a second stack because my two tools just became one. Now I have a spot for a second one. And that's an example of like using a brand archetype that became a compass for us to think about like, crap, what content do I do about this acquisition? Instead, it turned into what can I do that's funny? Okay, let's make it fit into this content, and it becomes easier.
Yeah. So you really just you led with the brand archetype and stayed true to your brand personality, and then that worked out great. I think that the other nice thing about the category that you're in is, as you said, customers don't have to choose only one. I think in a lot of cases they can go with a few, and you want to be one of those in that short list.
Yeah,
So
and a
maybe
good
that
one.
affects how you speak against the competition or how you think about that.
Yeah, I think if you're in a different case, which my previous company was like that. Like when I worked at Dine doing stuff. Sorry, it's some people say Din, so you're okay with saying Din earlier. But
Okay.
when I was at Dine, a lot of people would use us or they would use a second DNS provider or something. We were selling managed DNS, which is like IT stuff that makes your domain. It makes it so you register a domain, you can point it to whatever server you want. When I was doing marketing there, we basically had a very tough pitch to try and get someone to spend for two providers, and that's kind of less advantageous because that was the scenario. If you're listening and you're a marketer and you're trying to figure out like what do I do to differentiate with my competition and stuff, I think one of the ways you can kind of think about it is like you need to find some sort of insight that you can offer to a customer in your pitch that's different than the other company. And I'll give you a perfectly good example of this. Zora is a billing platform, right? Like
Yeah.
everybody, most people use Zora in the software space for stuff. Zora doesn't go to market and say we have the best billing platform. We have great features. We integrate with Salesforce, all this stuff. Zora goes to the market selling you on the idea that you need to think about how to make your business more like a subscription. And they give you, and that's the way they frame everything. And it just so happens that like, hey, you really need to think about how to make your business a subscription business model. And oh,
Mhm.
by the way, we make a lot of those things easier if you need it. And if you're using another billing platform, you're like, oh, cool, I can use that billing platform if I want. But like, what's going to make you switch and differentiate and deal with the headache of switching a billing platform is that they are the lighthouse that's guiding you through that shift in your business to become a subscriber. And it's a really smart idea that you need to do
Mhm.
to differentiate if you're trying to find a special spot for yourself.
Yeah. And I think in that example, they just get the user to they reframe the problem. They get the user to think about something in an entirely different way, as opposed to saying, "Oh yeah, here we are. Here's our features versus theirs. Here's our price." But rather, maybe you're here researching in this category because you think, well, you have this need or you have this problem, but maybe there's another issue that, or you just haven't thought about this the right way, and you're reframing it in their mind, the problem itself. And I think if you can do that successfully, then you're probably going to win that customer. because
There's
you've enlightened them, you've educated them actually, and I think that's something that they won't forget.
Yeah, it's the comparison would be like you're basically their Sherpa guiding them through stuff, and it becomes a much better sale. Now,
Hmm.
people that are watching this probably be like, "Oh, I've seen like the greatest sales deck ever pitched." You've probably, I assume you've seen that, Paris, right? Like the Zora thing. They basically Andy Raskins broke down the Zora pitch deck and talked about why it's such a great pitch, and it is good. But there's an element that's missing now in 2021 that he doesn't talk about, and I learned this from talking to a couple people about this. You also need to add story with people in it to make your reframe better. So if you're trying to differentiate, you need to like splice in some storytelling there because everyone's competing for attention now. It's way harder to stand out. It almost was like if we did early internet marketing 10 or 15 years ago on things, it was like yelling at a library. Today we're yelling at a stadium. And that's like, so storytelling is one of the ways that you'll cut through that noise and figure that out. A lot of the stuff
Yeah.
that we do at LeadiQ in our content and to be funny, we're still telling a story too. And usually it's a story about like putting my foot in my mouth or like having a stupid haircut or like finding random dumb things like that to bring up.
Yeah. Let's talk more about content and your overall approach because I think you're doing some great stuff. Um, and I'm sure you're leading the content marketing there now. So what's your overall approach at Lead IQ to content and content marketing?
Yeah. So a couple things that I would recommend if you're just starting out, you need to do stuff with other people. That's like the easiest thing. I kind of look at the way I look at it is when you're making content, it's infotainment. Like you're providing information, but you're entertaining them. We actually invert the order that most companies do. So I care more about entertaining someone than giving them information. The information will come through the like the information will come through the
Hmm.
entertainment. And that's kind of how we approach it. So, for example, a lot of companies do webinars where they just hop on a Zoom. We still do webinars because we need to get leads in and stuff. But once a month, we do a talk show that I designed to be like a late night talk show. It's actually kind of inspired by Conan, sort of. But we do a
Hmm.
thing called B2B Tonight where I open up with the show. We have an intro. We do a comedy bit at the beginning for the first couple of minutes. And then we jump in with a guest. They come on and talk for 10 minutes. Then another guest comes in and talks about the same topic. And they cross talk. And it's really fun and engaging and different, and you learn just as much information as you would if you were staring at a slide deck for an hour on a normal webinar, except you're entertained and we're switching through it. And that's sort of my approach is like, can I find a way to entertain someone? I mean, you're doing it right now, Paris, with the podcast, right? Like we're flying through, we're asking questions, we're going through some stuff, we're telling stories. It's there to distract us from this fact that like one, you're probably bored sometimes at work, and two, life is short. You might as well fill silence with something that's entertaining and engaging. And that's kind of the approach that I take with marketing on that stuff. The
Yeah.
hardest part, obviously, is scaling the writing. Like sometimes I get in streaks where I can't come up with stuff. I mean, last year, for example, I hired a stand-up comedian to come be our content marketer. He's not working for us anymore. He's working at LinkedIn. Shout out to Rishi Mathur. But like Rishi came up with a lot of really funny and cool ideas and still got the information out there that the sales team needed to push people through the funnel and still gave information out there for us to collect leads and get people in the funnel.
Yeah.
And that's really what it's about is like finding that right balance of stuff. Everyone's always like, oh man, you can't go out and market and sell these big companies. But like CEOs at Fortune 100 companies still buy Ben and Jerry's ice cream. Their brands are silly. They're still buying stuff
Hmm.
that's silly and out there. They watch comedy. They watch stand-up comedy. They are into that whole culture still. Those are
Yeah.
normal people.
I heard that back in the day, Groupon, uh, they were hiring stand-up comedians to do all their writing. So all those Groupon deals were, or most of them were written by comics,
Oh, that's
comedic
awesome.
writers.
I
Yeah.
didn't know that. That sounds cool.
Yeah.
But
And that
like,
was one of the secret ingredients, I think, to their success. Now the whole thing, that whole model imploded about, I don't know, when was that, 10 years or so ago. But I thought that was pretty interesting.
yeah, I think the reason it imploded probably is because a lot of businesses spent money on it and didn't get return, right? Like, at least that's
Yeah.
my understanding, right?
Yeah.
So,
And,
so
and there were really no barriers to entry either. So suddenly you just had too much competition, and then it just destroyed the price.
So stemming off that though, one of the things you might be thinking is like, well, I'm a marketer or I'm a sales rep and I don't have enough help. I don't have enough people that can be on camera and do stuff. The thing is, whether you work in sales and marketing and you're listening to this podcast, you actually like anyone that works in sales is probably comfortable talking. You should be the person that's out there doing stuff. Like our first
Hmm.
couple of years here, we have AEs literally run our webinars because they're professional talkers. That's their job. They should listen and they have to process stuff. And best practice, obviously, is to listen
Hmm.
first. But they know how to facilitate and talk to people and dig and do discovery and unlock stuff and get information out there. You should be using your sales team for this. Every rep on your team could be a face of your brand.
Hmm. That's a great, actually, that's a great tip. Something that we're trying to work on at our agency as well, is to get people other than myself to get their face out there. Um, I guess it's part of what Gary Vee talks about. Sometimes there's a psychological hurdle to putting yourself out there, and I think there's some fear of judgment, and I think you just have to get through an uncomfortable period of just doing it at the beginning, and then it starts to get easier. Like anything, I think it's like training a muscle group or something, and then eventually you just stop caring as much about making mistakes, or I don't know who might not like this, or who's going to be a hater, or anybody judging.
That's why.
And
Well, that's why.
then it starts to get just fun at that point.
Yeah, and that's why the brand archetyping thing, even though your company does it, you can actually do it as an individual person of your brand. You don't have to match up with the company on everything. So, like, I might
Hmm.
have someone on our company that might be a Sage brand that's more of like the smartest person in the room. They can still put stuff out there and be that Sage brand as long as they're part of the LeadiQ team. Like, I just want them in the T-shirt
Hmm.
with our
Yeah.
logo at the bottom right if they're going to help people and show stuff. Like, that's, I think if you pick a brand archetype, it becomes a lot easier for you to be less comfortable because you have a little bit of a compass. It's like a lighthouse that's telling you, like, hey,
Hmm.
gravitate toward this because we know this works. And like,
Yeah.
it's been proven time and time again that that stuff works.
Yeah. And tell me about the repurposing aspect, because now you all are creating a lot of content, various forms. A big part of this, I believe, also is repurposing content. Do you have a particular method for taking your longer form content and chopping that up and repurposing?
Yeah. So I actually last June I hired a full time video editor. His name's Nick Edgar, and I worked on him with him for a bunch of projects before on some of those
Hmm.
campaigns you mentioned in my bio. Nick basically will take everything that we do that's longer form and cut it down to shorter form. And it's great. We use it for social stuff to feed on our channel. I'll put stuff out there when I'm on vacation if I'm not making a new content thing. I try to put something out every week, by the way, that's brand new. That's like a rule that I try to do and live by, like no matter what. But yeah, that's kind of how you approach it. The other thing is not, I don't know if this is necessarily true. I haven't seen data back this up, but I've learned this from some people in sales. Not everybody's a visual person or an audio person. They might be more of a reader. And so we'll take some stuff like, for example, last week I did an interview with BDR enablement manager at Zoom. And we talked about how she climbed up from a BDR to become a BDR enablement uh, team and how she's fixing process. That's getting repurposed right now into a blog post with 5 tips
Hmm.
that we'll put out there. And we'll also embed clips of the video inside the blog post as well. Now I'm double dipping and I don't have to, like, one piece of content's turning into 1 hour of us talking is turning into 10 hours of content.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I heard that there was an SDR that has on your team that was promoted. Let me just get to that. But someone that moved from an SDR team lead into a marketing role. Do you think that transition is it common? I think you did it. Is it common, and is it feasible for someone to move from, let's say, from SDR BDR over into marketing, and how does one even think about that?
Yeah, so there's 3 things to look for if you're eyeballing the bench for BDRs to move into that instead of an AE role or BDR manager or lifelong BDR. A couple things I'd look for. You want to see if the person shows signs of creativity. John Mazza, who's the person you're talking about, he has done so many great creative prospecting videos. He used to send videos to people with like he'd do silly stuff. He'd do him dancing in a Green Man costume, which fits our brand a lot. He'd put on a captain's hat and do a bunch of poses and talk as a sea captain when he'd send videos to people, and he'd get like he had like a 30-something% response rate on stuff. Problem with Mazda is he'd been prospecting for 5 years, so he's getting burned out by it. And
Yeah.
so, like, the creativity is one piece. Another thing you want to look for if you're going to pluck someone from the BDR team is look at their writing. That's a really important part here too. You want to see if they can write. Best way to look at what they do is look at the cold emails they send every day. Are they coming up with creative new things to innovate? Are they saying stuff? Do they have a grasp on the language that fits really well with what you're looking for? I would look at his cold emails all the time, and he had great language that he write there that was full of personality, but still informative. He was sticking to the positioning that we tried to arm everybody with our playbooks and our battle cards, while
Mhm.
still finding a creative way to execute it in his own voice. And the last part that I think really made him stand out that you could look for if you're tapping into the BDR stuff as a potential is you could also look at uh, how's their business acumen. Do they understand the space? And that's the advantage you get off of BDR as opposed to someone outside that you might hire. Like I could go get a content marketer, but if I get someone that hasn't worked in the sales space, they have to learn the lay of the land, what people care about, what our buyers think about. He just spent months literally talking to, our years talking to people that we're trying to target, so he knows how they think and what they talk about.
Now, I have to ask this question. It's probably an obvious one, but do you eat your own dog food, so to speak? Do you use LeadiQ for your own prospecting?
Oh yeah, yeah. I actually still prospect sometimes too. I mainly do cold email. I do some cold calling here and there, but I've mainly been doing
Hmm.
cold email because it's passive. So like I could prospect someone for an hour. I could do prospecting for an hour, go do my marketing job, and then get a response. If I do cold calling, it's basically like I'll rip a couple. I might rip 6 or 7 connects on a 1 hour session. But like if I get one connect, basically my hour is done because we'll talk on the phone for 10 minutes. So like that
Hmm.
basically will like go through it. What I've been doing is we'll actually do a couple things. LeadiQ lets you, I'm not trying to pitch our own product, it's just some stuff that you can do if you happen to be a customer, but LeadiQ lets
Yes,
you
sure.
enrich based on first name, last name, and company name. When I do post on social, I usually capture the people that like and engage it, and then have someone on the SDR team reach out and they'll reference the content that they liked. That's one way that a lot of people use us. Another thing that
Hmm.
I'll do is if you use LinkedIn Sales Navigator and I have a guest coming up on a webinar and their connections are public, I'll actually go prospect and capture all their connections that fit into our ICP and then give that to the sales team to go reach out to those people as prospects and saying like if I had you Paris on, I might be like, hey, I'm having Paris on next week for BB tonight. Thought you might want to attend. We're going to be talking about this, and I know you're connected with them on LinkedIn.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah, so like we'll do some stuff like that on the marketing team that kind of integrate and unite the teams a little bit.
Oh, that's really cool. And
And
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say we also will do some stuff with our marketing team's heavily embedded with sales. So like some of the training that I make that we do for marketing content will offer for teams that we have in pipeline. So like if I have $100,000 deal with somebody that our reps trying to close, we'll offer to do like the same social selling training I might do for a webinar. I'll tailor just for that one account and change it a little bit for them based on their policies. And then we'll
Hmm.
go do that 1 hour training, but we do it for one account at a time. And we put it on like a real webinar, full production, lower thirds with names. We'll
Hmm.
splice in their bosses and have them talk sometimes. But like we do a fully embedded webinar for one account because it's worth my hour of time. These little wins get us momentum. This momentum helps us get more customers. And the other cool
Yeah.
part, unfortunately, is that sales has such high turnover. Average person in sales changes jobs every 9 months. If I
Hmm.
touch 3 or 4 of those people in that account webinar that I do for that one account, and they all go to different companies, they bring us with them.
Yeah. That's a great idea. I've been trying something recently. I do a LinkedIn Live once a week, and we call it SaaS marketing teardown. And I dig into one aspect of a SaaS company's marketing. Could be a landing page, or it could be paid strategy or something. And usually those are selected strategically as well. And it's either someone that we're trying to get on their radar screen, or we want to get a little bit of thought leadership in that category. So um, maybe that company might be a little bit out of reach. So last week it was Salesforce, and actually the Salesforce versus Pipedrive marketing battles on landing pages that we see. So a little bit out of reach, but still the CRM space is we want to make some noise in that space, and just let people know that we're aware of that category and how people are doing things, communicating.
I mean, if you want to take it a step further too, you could technically do that same teardown, but get someone from Salesforce on it too, or get someone from a different company on there that works in the space. And then
Hmm.
when you put that content out there and tag that person and give them the content and they post it, you're now coming up in their connections feeds for X amount of time. You want
Yeah.
to evolve it even further. This is where it can be really cool. you also could you make that and then go send that to a prospect to break in. So if I do a
Mhm.
teardown of something, like for example, I get a cold email from, I'll give you a good example actually. I got a cold email from a company that's like a $2 billion valuation, and it was a bad email. I didn't shame the SDR. I emailed them and said, hey, I'm going to give you some tips on this email if you want. That might help you. Obviously, you don't have to use them if you don't want to, but like
Mhm.
I give them the ejection and said, I'm responding because I want to be respectful of your time and stuff. Do you, and I'll ask them this, and they're like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And I went and recorded it, gave them some feedback on their email, sent it to them. And then I asked them, hey, do you mind if I, after they liked the advice, it helped them a lot. I asked them afterward, hey, would you mind if I put this out online? And they just asked me to block out their information. Now I've got content that I'm putting out there that I just did, and I did it for one account. And by the way, that company turned into a customer of ours eventually. So like I
Yeah.
built a relationship through that individual contributor. They showed the advice to their boss. They said, "What's LeadiQ?" They looked into it. They filled out a form. The rest is history.
That's
I just
cool. That's a
I
great
just
story.
panicked. I just panicked for a second, thinking I said the company name. That's what I did. You see my face? I was like, "Wait, oh, I didn't say that." Okay, we're good. We're good.
You're good. You're okay now. You didn't. Um, hey, I wanted to ask now about a little bit more about the marketing strategy, because I see that on LeadiQ, all the pricing plans are leading to just really to a contact form where I know I'm gonna get introduced to sales. But I was a little curious why there's no sign of any product led growth type of approach where you say take us for a spin for 14 days. And was that a conscious decision not to go product led growth, or are you all still have it planned at some point, or is it just not really feasible in your
So
space?
yeah, there's two things going on right now. The first is we actually did product-led growth for the first couple of years, and then switched more to sales function.
Okay.
Basically, what happened was when we were doing product-led growth, we'd have a lot of fraud sign up, and we couldn't get around it. So, like, I'll give you an example.
Hmm.
One of the best programs we used to do is we used to let people try 100 free leads. I go and put a 100 free lead form on our website, and the final straw that broke the camel's back was there was a day I woke up in August and I was checking our numbers, and I logged in and we had 12,000 downloads, and it was all from the
Hmm.
same account in like Sri Lanka, someone just trying to get free emails.
Oof.
So I basically
Yeah.
had to I had to we had to scramble to figure it out because we're like, why do, now we have all this junk data in our marketing and all this stuff, and we have legitimate customers that were coming in that were getting ignored. We tried some stuff with we eventually did something where you had to put a credit card in to do a free trial and sign up. And it was okay. We actually had good conversion on it. The problem was eventually we wanted to expand and mobilize it internally at a company, and we realized we lost a lot of that leverage if we had someone go into a demo. So now we're doing mainly orchestrated, planned proof of concepts with companies. Now, the
Hmm.
future, we're at that point now where we are probably going to move back to a product qualified lead motion for some stuff. At the moment, if you go to our website and fill out the form, we route you based on your company size. So we enrich it with our own data. And if we see
Okay.
someone's a certain size, we map you to sales. If not, we map you to a confirmation email that signs up for you. Now, here's the interesting part. The product qualified motion that we're going to work on is basically going to make it so that it's more designed for bottom up selling for these large organizations too. That's currently being engineered and reworked right now, and that'll probably be out in Q4. But it's for a little while, it was mainly we didn't have the capacity to deal with the fraud. We now have over 150 people working here, so like I can get a whole team to work on like let's tackle the fraud problem now. Back then, when we had small, like I don't know, less than a dozen engineers, it was very difficult to do that. So like we're at a much better place today to handle that.
Oh, that's a great context. Yeah. So the thing that you're working on, I couldn't quite get my head around that. It's going to be it's actually going to demonstrate how you can sell bottom up. So the leads can experience that themselves when they sign up.
Yeah, basically what we're going to do is we're going to build something that tiers out what features you have capability for. And this is after doing some like we did some work on figuring out what features people care about at different tiers. For example,
Hmm.
smaller companies use LeadiQ to get data. Larger companies use LeadiQ to optimize workflow. We obviously care about getting more of the larger companies in the funnel. So
Hmm.
when someone comes in, we will tailor the experience of them based on their company size to emphasize certain features and stuff, and that'll be the next level of this. Prior to that, we
Gotcha.
basically were just
Hmm.
we had to make just one because that's all we could manage. But because we have enough, I mean, our team is pretty much half engineers now. It's a lot
Hmm.
easier for us to go get like a team focused on fixing this and optimizing it. That's
Hmm.
sort of what the plan will be. And then on the sales side, it'll basically be about like taking those people and chasing them and showing them value on why they should, commit to us in a longer term like
Yeah.
solution sort of. So that's where we're going toward this.
So it's going to be a little bit now of introducing maybe account-based marketing for those mid-market or larger companies. Yeah. And you're enriching with your own data. Is LeadiQ's own enrichment to get the company size?
Yep. It's not available to the public yet. So if you're listening, you're like,
Okay.
oh, I can use it for enrichment. We don't do this yet. We're doing it internally as like a test and audit, but we've been enriching with our own data for roughly about 9 months. I
Uh-huh.
think the hard part about the enrichment space is even though LeadiQ gives people data, we're really trying. I know you brought this up earlier, which is great because I think this is something we want to talk about. We really try not to position LeadiQ as a data provider, mainly because data is a commodity at this point. Like if I go to the grocery store and I buy
Mhm.
apples, and then I go to a farmer's market and buy apples, the apples are pretty much going to taste the same. Um, Data to us is not a differentiator between all these different data providers that are out there. I think the things that we're going to do the differentiator are going to be focused a lot more on making it so that reps can like eliminate busy work. You can focus a
Mhm.
little bit more on like being more strategic with your prospecting, and eventually we'll build some features on top of that that will make it so you can like collaborate with selling and stuff. But like the data thing is just kind of like I don't want to just go pedal as a data
It is a
provider because
commodity.
it's so easy. It's so easy to get data now. It's not. And by the way, if you're listening to this and you're like, "What are you talking about, Ryan? Data is a big problem for our company." Just add a second provider. It's the easiest way to solve any data problem you have. Usually, if you have a second
Mhm.
provider, you can shoot up your data coverage by 30%.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a commodity, and I think it's more about optimizing those workflows um, and then I think the integration part also. How many CRMs today do you all integrate with?
So the biggest use case for us is actually people use Salesforce. We also integrate with HubSpot. So if you use HubSpot for your
Hmm.
CRM, you can use it. But the biggest thing that we see is the companies that are using a sales engagement platform like SalesLoft or Outreach love using us because we make it
Hmm.
so much easier to get a lead into those tools. At the moment, if you
Hmm.
don't use us, and let's say I find a prospect online, like on LinkedIn, that I want to prospect, I have to grab that person, copy and paste all their info into Salesforce, make the lead, and then enrich it with whatever data provider I'm using for stuff. And then I got to import that person from Salesforce into Outreach or SalesLoft, and then add them into the sequence or cadence that I want. We do that all in one click. So you literally just pick who you
Hmm.
want to send it to, and it rifles it off right into that Outreach cadence or Outreach sequence or SalesLoft cadence. So those are the
Yeah.
providers we work with right now. We kind of don't really need to add other integrations yet. It hasn't come up as a major problem. The other cool part is because of the way that those sales engagement platforms work with bidirectional syncs, you can technically just buy one of those and then use their bidirectional sync to push into the CRMs that they built with.
Hmm. Do you work with Zapier?
Uh,
Can you just pipe it in with Zapier or no?
so kind of. We
Okay.
also integrate with Google Drive, and every time that you capture someone with LeadiQ, it creates a new row in a Google Sheet for you if
Yeah.
you sync it correctly. All you have to do is set up something in Zapier that says, "Hey, if added to Google Sheet, push into whatever app you want." So, like, we have a lot of people that
Yeah.
will use like a Pipe Drive or Copper is another popular one that we see people
Yeah.
use.
Yeah. We're
And
on Pipe Drive. Yeah.
yeah, you just link those guys in through Google Sheets, and you can do it that way. The only
Yep.
downside is there's a 5 minute delay.
Well, I mean, we could live with that, and probably most people could.
Yeah, that's true too. It's just if you're someone that's like, oh, I want to go rifle this off right away, and
Mhm.
that's kind of the scenario you could deal with too.
Yeah. Wow, that's excellent. So, hey, I want to hear last about your podcast because it looks like you've been at it for about 5 years. Is that right?
Yeah, it's been way too long.
The prospecting podcast.
So I basically, for me, the way that we kind of frame the podcast, I try to get people on that are not the normal sales expert people you see in our space.
Hmm.
I mean, we do have some of those people sometimes, but um, it's basically we're flies in the wall just talking. And like I'll have conversations about stuff. Once in a great while, it'll be someone plugging something so we can talk about a specific topic. But it's very easy to do on our end. I highly recommend everybody does a podcast. There's so many of them now, but like
Yeah.
if you're a company, you should at least have a podcast about your industry, just because it's a good way to correspond. The other thing is this. This is a little secret for people. We also have reps trained at LeadiQ so that if someone says they're not interested in us at the moment or they're stuck in a contract, we have them ask if they want to be on our podcast. And it allows us to build a relationship with that person so that 3 or 4 months from now, when they're in the evaluation process, like, oh, I heard about LeadiQ when you were reading an ad in the middle of the podcast or something.
Yeah.
And so like you basically build a relationship with that person through the podcast to nurture your relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, just to build on that, because I've only been at this for a few months and I really enjoy it. One of the things that I like so much is just the ability to have a conversation without any sales pressure, without there ever being some lingering hanging cloud that, all right, do they suspect I'm going to sell them something or I don't know. It really is a lot of times no strings attached. I want to hear unique voices. I want to serve our audience and give them great tips and give perspectives they haven't heard, and not having any sales pressure. Really, it's one of the nicer things about podcasting. And then there's that halo effect that people still could remember and come back. But that's not the purpose of it. So that to me is one of the reasons I like doing it so much.
Yeah, I definitely think what you're going to see a lot more in the future probably is you'll probably see a lot more companies do podcasts that will also be video casted or live streamed, and then they'll repurpose it as a podcast afterward. One of the things
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to do, but I feel like the tech hasn't been that good and I can't get the reach for it on stuff, is to do podcasts with live questions in it. Like it'd be so cool to do
Mm-hmm.
call-ins and stuff. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, that would. I think Gary Vee does stuff like that, doesn't he? Where
Yeah,
he's got
he's mainly feeding off Twitch, I think, when he does it. But like
okay.
for us in the B2B space trying to build an audience and stuff, those people aren't usually hanging out on Twitch during the workday. So that's kind of the
Yeah.
hard part. Like I do LinkedIn Live, for example. LinkedIn Live is usually, for us, it's usually just like I'm going to hang out with an employee and just let people see what it's like when we hang out. And that's kind of what we'll just talk about something or debate something. And it's fun, but it's also like it's kind of a stressful thing to deal with a little bit, because you need
Mm-hmm.
to get an audience to rely on that dynamic content. If you don't have that audience, you don't get questions. You don't get questions. You're kind of just sitting there without. It's like swimming without a life jacket on.
Yeah. I know in our first several webinars, I have to admit something here, but when we would have some employees just be ready to step in if there was ever crickets for, I don't know, a minute. So when we got to Q&A, and if we got crickets, we had a couple of employees that were standing by ready to get in there. And oh, it looks like Anastasia's got a question. All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah. I remember once very early in LeadiQ, I did a webinar, and someone said, "Ryan, tell your mom I say hi." And I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. And I had pushed something out on Facebook, and what happened was one of my cousins actually signed up for a webinar and was asking a question, and I didn't piece together that it was my cousin at the time. So like, yeah,
Oh man,
you just got to get it started. I mean, the Reddit guys did that too. When they were starting Reddit, they basically made fake post up as different throwaway accounts to get
Mhm.
conversations started with people, so they felt like there was some social proof that the thing they were doing had an impact and a purpose.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. Well, Ryan, this has been great. Was there anything that I didn't ask you that you were hoping that I would ask you, or anything that you'd like our audience to know?
Um, no, I just think that if you're listening to this and you work in marketing, tell people in sales about this, because like I think I put a lot of content out there, but I'm really trying to fix sales. I think there's a way that we can all prospect better and make it so that, like, wouldn't it be great if we could go through our inbox and enjoy looking at cold emails? That's like the whole thing that I just want everybody to think about and come away with this. And you can do that. Sales can do that. You could literally enjoy writing cold emails and doing cold calling and not feel like garbage doing it if you just kind of take a second and say, I'm going to attack this like an agency. I'm going to attack this like a creative marketer and approach it that way. And that's just how I want you
Hmm.
guys to think about this as a takeaway.
Yeah, that's a great mindset, Ryan. And I feel the same way actually about ads online too. That I think ads that are done well can actually be really enjoyable, and that can be high quality content. And I think the same is true with your inbox. Wouldn't that be nice if I actually enjoyed and was entertained and delighted by people who had done their homework and approached me in a really thoughtful manner? And I would certainly be responding to a lot more of them also.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So it's, but that's my takeaway. I think if anyone's listening and trying to figure out like, oh, what's the big message here? The big message is, come on, let's make business to business is boring and it doesn't have to be. Like it could be so much better. Let's have fun with this stuff.
Yeah. That's a great way to leave us. And I believe we can get there too. I think sales can get there, and I think we're on our way actually. And it's great tools like LeadiQ and others that are all helping us to do that. So yeah, Ryan, thanks very much for coming on. I really enjoyed the chat today.
Yeah, great conversation. Thanks a lot, Paris.
All right.